Good morning, Bucknutters. Welcome to the Bucknuts Morning 5 here on Wednesday, February 8th, 2017. I am Dave Biddle, and I'm very happy to welcome in a special guest. He is Jeremy Birmingham from Land of 10. Birm, thanks so much for your time. How are you doing this morning?
I'm well. Glad to be here and enjoying what has been a fairly nice weather week in Ohio.
Yeah, this winter has been not so much winter-like. We've had a lot of 50-degree days. I like that. This is my type of winter. If I had to shovel my driveway like 2 or 3 times, so let's keep it this way. We're not going to focus on weather on this show. We're going to focus on 2018 recruiting for Ohio State. And, Birm, I want to start off with the 3 players that have already committed: quarterback Emory Jones from Georgia, safety Jaiden Woodbey from California, and running back Brian Snead from Florida. I think the Buckeyes are off to an outstanding start here. Not as good as a start they were off to last year, but still very good. My question for you, Jeremy, which of those 3 is the biggest risk to perhaps decommit from Ohio State, if any?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because at this point in the process, you have 3 top 100, top 75 players, basically, all of them from states that are thousands of miles away from Columbus and from campus at Ohio State. So there's always kind of that risk when you're dealing with out-of-state kids, especially a player like Jaiden Woodbey, whose father played at USC, and he's right in USC's backyard. Brian Snead from Tampa, and, as Urban Meyer talked about on signing day about kids from Florida that they just never stick that long. And then when you have a quarterback like Emory Jones, you're obviously dealing with a guy right in the heart of SEC country who has a new quarterback coach at Ohio State who he's not familiar with, a new offensive coordinator, Kevin Wilson. So he's kind of on that part of the fence where he's looking and seeing exactly what happens. I think that there's a case to be made that all of them are potential decommitments down the road, but I also feel that having guys like Woodbey and Emory Jones, who know each other pretty well from the Future 50 camps and stuff that they've been doing together, having those 2 at the same time working together, I think helps keep them solid. So I guess I'd go with Brian Snead as the most likely to not end up in the class, but also because the running back situation, when you have guys like Jaelen Gill and Lorenzo Lingard, players like that are out and about and are obviously very high on Ohio State's list, you wonder how that shakes out.
I want to look at recruiting from the class of 28 from Ohio. Ohio State signed 7 players from Ohio in its 2017 class, of course. So exactly 1/3 of the class was from the state of Ohio. Urban Meyer said on signing day, he wants to be more along the lines of 50-50 each year in terms of recruits from Ohio and out-of-state prospects. So, Birm, looking at the class of 2018 from Ohio, just how good is this class in your opinion, and how many guys from this state do you think the Buckeyes will take in this class?
Well, it's a significantly better class than the 2017 group, and the Buckeyes have, at least as we look at it now, they should have more room in that 2018 class than they did in the 2017 class. So in my mind, I think that number is going to be in that 11 to 12 range if things go the way that I think they can. You obviously have top of the line players at the part of the class that sort of runs the show, and that's the Jackson Carmans and the Jaelen Gills. And then you have Christian Smith down in Wayne. And then you have the Pickerington Central group with Trenton Gillison and Xavier Henderson, who I think both of those guys, if Ohio State decides to ramp up their pursuit of them, I think that you could see them both flip at some point in the process. And they're both at positions that I think the Buckeyes will take multiple players. So I think that 11 or 12 is a good number. The top 20 in the state of Ohio this year is pretty loaded. And the interesting thing is that it's really top heavy. But then there's a number of really solid offensive linemen in the middle, like John Dirksen and Blaine Scott, to complement and to supplement a player like Jackson Carman potentially. So it's an interesting group.
That's great news for Ohio State. You always like it when the ground is fertile at the home base of recruiting here in Ohio. You mentioned Jackson Carman. I'm going to ask you about 6 Ohio prospects in particular from the 2018 class. Let's start with Jackson Carman, who you mentioned from Fairfield. He is the number 1 ranked offensive tackle prospect in the country, according to the 24/7 Sports Composite. When do you think he will decide, ballpark estimate, and is he likely to be a Buckeye in your opinion?
Jackson has said a number of times that he wants to experience what recruiting has to offer and take visits. I would imagine that at some point, if he wants to be a Buckeye, which I believe he does, and I think that will ultimately be his choice, but I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State asks him to, make a decision public and go ahead and sort of be the spearhead of the class and help lead the group. So for me, I'd look somewhere around a July, maybe a Friday Night Lights type of commitment for him. If not then I think you are probably looking into signing day maybe.
You also mentioned Jaelen Gill, outstanding prospect from Westerville South. He's ranked as the number 3 all-purpose back in the land. Same question, Birm. When do you think he will decide, and do you think he's likely to be a Buckeye?
I do think he's likely to be a Buckeye. I think Jaelen is actually probably more likely to end up out of the class than Jackson Carman. If I had to handicap the two of them, I would say Jaelen, because I know how high he is on UCLA, Tennessee, Notre Dame, a few other schools. But again, I think that he's a player that ends up at Ohio State just because he fits the offense so perfectly, and there's not going to be anybody on the roster that does what he does. And losing Curtis Samuel, losing Dontre Wilson, and not replacing anybody with like Tyjon Lindsey could have been in this 2017 class. I think he's a bigger priority even now than he was before, and Urban Meyer has never slacked on letting him know that he's an important piece of the puzzle. And again, I think a Friday Night Lights type of commitment is potentially where to look. And if not, Jaelen has said he wants to take visits and go through signing, maybe a signing day as well. So it's an interesting time because these Ohio kids that normally are the ones that get in early and start to sort of lead the class are not really doing that yet. And it'll be interesting to see how Ohio State responds and if they kind of poke them a little bit to try to get them to accelerate their timelines.
Another young man you mentioned, wide receiver LaChristian Blue Smith from Huber Heights Wayne, number 3 wide receiver in the country. Again, same question. When do you think he will decide, and do you think he's likely to be a Buckeye?
I think Blue has a few decisions to make. I mean, first and foremost, he needs to decide how much he's going to focus on football versus basketball, and that's an important part of the puzzle right now for him. Beyond that, I think that he's really just trying to figure out where he fits into programs as far as their offenses. A lot of schools see him as a tight end. That's how I personally see him when I've seen him in camps and games for Wayne. But I feel like he's a guy that could wait probably September or so before he makes a decision. And I think ultimately it's going to be a matter of if he believes that he's going to be a wide receiver or a tight end. And I don't think that a lot of schools are going to tell him what he wants to hear there. So if of these first 3 players, I think that he's the one least likely to be a Buckeye because I really believe that he's going to be a tight end at the next level and he wants to hear that he's a wide receiver.
And 3 more, and then we'll talk some land of 10, and we'll get you out of here. The number 5 outside linebacker in the country, Dallas Gant from Toledo St. John's. When will he decide, and do you think he'll be a Buckeye?
Dallas was actually on the fence about committing back at the end of November when he made his visit to Ohio State for the Ohio State-Michigan game. And I think that he was delayed a little bit by the changing of linebacker coach at Ohio State and maybe pushed him off a bit. I'd expect him to make a decision sometime in the spring. I think that Ohio State has a lead there that's fairly comfortable. The interesting fact or the thing to look at is whether or not Billy Davis is able to maintain the momentum that Luke Fickell had built. Notre Dame is obviously an important part of that puzzle. He's been there more than he's been anywhere else. And then Michigan State and Michigan are also in the mix. But I think ultimately this comes down to Ohio State and Notre Dame. And I think the relationships he has with the Buckeyes will win out, and I think that should be this spring.
Sticking with outside linebackers in Ohio, but way down I-75 south, Christopher Oats from Cincinnati Winton Woods. He's a number 16 outside linebacker in the country. What's your vibe on him? What do you think he's going to decide? And do you think we'll be seeing him in scarlet and gray?
Yeah, Chris is another one that was on the border of committing back at the end of November, and I feel like unlike Dallas, where Dallas may have reeled himself in a little bit because of coaching changes, I think Chris maybe is just asked to slow down a little bit by Ohio State as they try to figure out how he fits into the class. And I see him as a potential defensive end, a guy who can play with his hand in the ground, and I think they're wanting to see how he grows in the next few months and maybe get him back at a camp or so this spring and see exactly what he does. He runs really well. They love what he can do at linebacker, but I'm wondering if the potential at his height and his frame to be a defensive end could change around where he fits. But I do think he ends up a Buckeye at some point, and I'm not entirely sure when. I think he may be a guy waiting for the green light from the Buckeyes to commit.
I know the Buckeyes need to land some defensive tackles in this class. They've offered Aeneas Hawkins from Cincinnati Moeller. He's only a 3-star prospect, ranked as the nation's 30th best defensive tackle. Maybe he's underrated for all I know, but give us the latest on Aeneas Hawkins. When do you think he will decide, and do you think he will be a Buckeye?
Yeah, Aeneas has an announcement date scheduled for May. He has 30-some offers, as you said, but he's got Ohio State, Florida State, Alabama, Florida. I mean, the star ranking doesn't necessarily equate to his offer list. He's obviously got NFL bloodlines. His father, Artrell, played for the Cincinnati Bengals. His brother, or his uncle, Andrew Hawkins, played for Cleveland in the last few years in the Bengals before that. So you know that he's a kid who's getting a lot of good advice and making sure he's checking off all the boxes about what he's looking for in a school. I think he will be a Buckeye, and he'll make his decision. I think it's May 11th. And whenever that happens, I would expect him to commit to Ohio State that day. He's got a great relationship with Larry Johnson.
Birm, great insights there. All right, now tell us about Land of 10. Tell us about Land of 10 in general, and what do you do specifically for the site?
Yeah, we're trying to cover the Big Ten from all angles, and not just recruiting or football or basketball. But you know, it's a unique site that has a very alert and awake breaking news team, and then we have myself and Ben Axelrod and Ryan Ginn, who have all been on the Ohio State beat for a few years now, working to cover the team and recruiting. I obviously handle recruiting for the Land of 10 site and for the Ohio State portion of the site, and just looking to keep growing and appreciate the opportunity to be on with you guys. And obviously I've known you and Steve and all the guys at Bucknuts for quite a while now, so glad that we can all, you know, still be friends.
You guys are doing a great job over there, and really happy for you and the other guys over there, like you mentioned, Ben and Ryan. So really happy for you, and thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate you joining us here on the Bucknuts Morning 5.
No problem, Dave. I appreciate it whenever you need me.
He is Jeremy Birmingham from Land of 10. Read his stuff. You probably already do. He is at Birm on Twitter. Thank you very much, Birm, and thanks to all the listeners out there for tuning into the show. I appreciate it. Hope you all have a great day. Let's hear some Buckeye swag, best end band in the land.